Welcome to Emerge and Empower Podcast TV, a platform where resilience meets transformation. Here, we amplify voices that have faced trials, trauma, and adversity, stories that inspire hope, healing, and empowerment. Every episode brings raw, unfiltered conversations with individuals who have risen from hardship, embracing faith, strength, and purpose. Join us as we break the silence, uplift one another, and emerge stronger together. New episodes air Wednesdays at 6 p.m. English and Saturdays at 6 p.m. with select Saturdays in Creole for our Haitian audience.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Emerge and Empower with your host, Dr. Lynn J. Welcome, welcome. We are back. I know you've seen a lot of awesome, amazing things that has been happening around us, and we are truly thankful for what God has done for us. We had the magazine that just came out, the June magazine, and immediately, like within the hour, we went up to 3K views, and that is all thanks to you as we continue to bring you great content and information. Remember, this is a platform where we believe that we need to heal for real, not superficially, but for real. Individuals come onto this podcast each time to share their own journey, and they want to see change. They turned their life where they took purpose from the pain and testimony from all that they have gone through, and they bring it here on the set. So on today, I would like to encourage you right now, go ahead and click the link, share it with your friends, share it in all the groups, and let them know that Dr. Lynn J is on today on Emerge and Empower. Yep, I'm waiting for you. Go ahead. And if you have not subscribed yet, let's build our viewing audience and subscribe on today. Now I will go right in and introduce our guest, none other than Debbie Simmons. Debbie Simmons is a trauma-informed coach, nonprofit CEO, and a legacy builder whose journey is marked by both profound loss and redemptive purpose. After the heartbreaking loss of her biological quadruplets, Debbie stepped into a life of radical obedience, adopting 9 children from trauma backgrounds and founding Anchor Point, a multi-site organization supporting families through counseling, education, medical care, and spiritual development. Through decades of parenting and leading and healing, Debbie discovered the power of trauma-informed tools, faith, and emotional resilience. Her story is one of rising from burnout, chaos, deep grief to equip others with practical strategies that transform homes, hearts, legacies today. She empowers overwhelmed parents, caregivers, and women in transition to go from stuck to anchored, one next best step at a time. Again, one next best step at a time. So we are truly honored and blessed to have Debbie on the set. Debbie, welcome to Emerge and Empower on today. Let our audience know that you are here and where you are tuning in from and connected from today.
I am super excited to be here with you guys, and I am in the Houston, Texas area, right where NASA Mission Control Center. That's where I am.
Wow. Let's applaud, let's clap, and welcome Debbie to Emerge and Empower. Again, if you have not done so already, get on the front row seat in your life right now. Listen in because you heard it. She lost quadruplets, but turn around and adopted 9 children. Talk about a woman on a mission, a woman who's not letting her pain define her. So Debbie, we're going to dive right into your story on today. So let's dive into that breaking point in your life.
Sure. Well, I'm going to go a little before the breaking point. And what I like to tell people is, hey, it's a ride of highs and lows. So buckle your seatbelt and get ready. But when I was a teenager, I had this dream of being a young grandma. Okay, so I had this goal in my mind, and it was because my parents were the youngest of big sibling groups, and my grandparents were passed away before I came kind of on the scene.
Okay.
And we had a lady that kind of adopted us as a grandma, and I loved her and everything, but she had multiple sclerosis for years. And I
Oh,
watched her. I learned how to have joy and suffering from her, and I loved her. But what it made me realize was I was like, I want to be young when I have my grandkids, right? And so
right,
being a person who can accomplish objectives and set a goal and everything, I knew that I needed to figure out a guy, fall in love, get married, have children, then I could have grandbabies, right?
right.
That was the journey I set out on. And lo and behold, met my husband in college. We got married, and I said, "Can we start having kids?" And we started trying, and we ended up with many, many years of infertility struggles. And infertility itself is a defining moment for you in regards to. I remember one of our last attempts was I was just so devastated because we didn't get pregnant. And I laid there and was going, I don't even feel like I'm worth anything.
Right.
Failure as a mom and a failure as a wife and a failure as a woman and on and on and on the list goes, and you can really
Hmm.
spiral out of control. And my husband was like, look, we got 2 more tries on this study. And I said, okay, well, I was mopey that night. And I said, I'll pick myself up the next day, but I was mopey all night. And the next day we got up and we tried again and it didn't work. And on our very last attempt, we went to 2 different doctors, 2 hours apart, 2 different types of ultrasounds, and they told us we were having twins. And I was like, great, back on track for young grandma, 5 years, road, curve, and all this stuff. And so off we go. And, when you have twins, it's kind of, the pregnancy moves into the high risk category and you got to kind
Right.
of walk through all that. And so we were doing that. And I remember being a little overwhelmed at first, trying to figure out like how we're going to do this, 2 kids and all this stuff. But somehow we got really comfortable that we could figure this out. And if
Hmm.
you spiritually, I became a Christian as a very young child. And so God was always in the picture in this. And we learned, to trust him in this. And we started walking at 13 weeks.
Hmm.
I thought I'd made it out of my first trimester, which is always the issue. And I was on my way up the in the Exxon building where I worked. And all of a sudden I started bleeding everywhere.
Wow.
And I was sure I was going to lose one of the boys or maybe both of them. And they go to the emergency room and they say, looks like everything's calmed down, but you need to go home and rest.
Right.
We hear a heartbeat, but we don't know if there's 1 or 2. But go home, and then on Monday go to the high risk doctor. So on Monday
Hmm.
we went to the high risk doctor, and while we were there, sitting in the lobby, because infertility and high risk pregnancies, all you do is hurry up and wait. So
Right.
we're sitting in the lobby, and I look at my husband and I said, dude, we think we're going to lose one or both of the kids. And wouldn't it be funny if we went in there and they told us we were having triplets? And so we go into the exam room, and the ultrasound tech starts the exam, and I immediately notice there's 3. And I'm like, whoa, there's 3. And she was like, yeah. So she does all her measurements, and she's like, let's just take one last picture. And so she gets all the babies on the screen, and I immediately go, oh, there's 4. And I said, don't even bother looking for 5, 6, 7, or 8. It's all high risk at this point.
That's true.
And yeah. And so she's like, okay, I probably need to get the doctor. And I'm like, I bet. And so she gets the doctor, and the doctor comes in, confirms everything. And she's like, we'll help you figure your way and, all this stuff. And obviously I was attempting to miscarry because I wasn't taking care of 5 of us. I didn't even know there was 5 of us in there, right?
Right.
Me and 4 more. And so when we left the doctor that day, we knew that to make it to the next day was pretty amazing when you carry that many children. And so our goal was 30 weeks, and we're like at 13 weeks. So off we go. We do all the right things. I drink gallons and gallons and gallons of water and never passed my test, but I always drank a lot of water, did everything, ate like a horse, all these good things. And around 23 weeks, we decided to go to the hospital to take the tour that you would usually do before you went in for delivery. And it was because I was getting very large and we didn't know how much longer I'd be moving around that much. And we were driving down the Houston freeway, traffic stops, the car behind us rear ends us. Not super bad, but they rear end us. And I remember telling my husband, I don't feel very good. And the cop does all his thing. We finish all that. And I'm like, let's go on to the hospital because I might not want to come back. And so we went on to the hospital. By the time I got there, I was like, I really don't feel good. And I couldn't feel anything because I was so large. And so when I got to the hospital, I convinced them to check me in. And I'm like, see if I'm having contractions because I don't want to drive home and have to drive back up here. So check it out. And so I was having contractions about 2 minutes apart. And they checked me in, got me hydrated, kept me overnight, got everything calmed back down. And when we left the hospital at 23 weeks, we realized that it's a miracle to make it to the next day. So we go home and life continues on. And at 26 weeks, I am walking around the house and I realize all of a sudden there's water on the floor. And I'm like, oh, it must be one of the baby sacs maybe rupturing. And I told my husband, I said, we got to go back to the doctor. And I said, as we go, why don't you go ahead and grab my bag? Because if this is the baby sac rupturing, they're going to put us in the hospital. Right. And off we went to the doctor. We sat and waited. And the doctor did say, yes, the baby sac had ruptured, and the goal was to go to the hospital, get in the bed, and stay there and see if I could get him to 30 weeks. Right. And on our way to the hospital, I was like, I'm not ready for the hospital. They're not ready for me. And it's one of those times that I kind of flipped out because I was just like, oh, this is just like going to jail. I'm going to be stuck in this bed and all this stuff. And we get there and make it through that first night. I asked my husband to stay. Because I was like, I know you can't do it every night, but stay with me this first night and let's just get settled. And my parents were coming real early the next day. Go to sleep. I wake up the next morning. I definitely am having contractions. I know it. And I tell my husband, go get the doctor. I know I'm having contractions. And the doctor comes in, they check everything out. And basically one of the babies had stuck their hand through my stitched cervix and was waving to the world. Wow. Hello, I'm coming. And the doctor looked at me and she said, you're going to have to deliver the baby. And I just remember sitting there just like, is this for real? I'm like, can you just like put the hand back and like, we'll forget that this ever happened and we'll just go on like nothing happened. And she's like, no, you have to deliver. And I was like, okay. And so I just kind of sat there and I was like, I got to figure my way through. I got to figure my way through this. And so I just resolved to figure my way. And they sent me off into surgery, brought me back into the exam room, and we waited. And several hours passed, and then little Zach arrived on the scene. And because medical technology at that point was not available to save him, he was going to pass away. So they just simply put Zach into my arms and I held him and I rocked him and he took his little hand and wrapped it around my finger and squeezed, hey, Mom, I'm here. I love you. And I just held that baby as he drifted off into eternity. And then we waited because we needed to see if my body was going to be able to let me carry the other three or if I was going to get sick. And after several hours, I was getting sicker and sicker and the blood work came back and it was all messed up. And a doctor came in and she said, you're going to have to induce the other three. And I was like, okay. And so they induced, and I sat there and was like, I'm going to have to figure my way through this. And the rest of the boys showed up. Josh, Nate, and Chris showed up about 3 hours later, and they placed them in my arms, and I rocked them and held them as they drifted off into eternity. And after all the dust settled that day, it was a very long day. I should have been there to celebrate.
Right.
And here I am trying to figure out, like, how do I plan 4 funerals? It just wasn't even on my radar, right? And so the dust settles. It's just me and my husband in the room, and I just kind of looked around and was thinking, and I'm like, how do I figure my way through this mess? There's so much pain, there's so much hurt. This dream that I have of being a young grandma, my love of children, all of this is I can do everything, and I can't figure this out, right? And the only thing I could come up with was, I just don't know anywhere else to turn but to trust God in this situation. I mean, I thought about everything, and I'm like, I just don't know how to do this unless God walks me through this. So I just was like, God, I trust you with this. I just don't know what to do. But what I learned is that, when we're faced with really hard situations, the thing that rises up in me usually is this question of why? Why me? Why now? Why God? Why the boys? Why? And you just like, why? You just want to scream, right? And God whispers to me, I need you to give me your why. And I'm like, no, I like my why, because it's the last thing I got left.
Right.
You want it? I'm like, what? And I'm, if God himself would have showed up and stood in front of me in that room, or anybody else would try to answer my why question, I just realized that, no answer that I would have gotten would have satisfied.
None.
Nothing. Not one, right? And so God's like, give me the why. And I'm like, "Ugh, okay, I'll give you my why." So I just like open my hands up, and I'm like, okay, you can have my why. And then I'm like, what do I do now? You just took my security blanket. And he's like, ask me a different question. And I'm like, what am I supposed to ask? I don't know what I'm doing. And he's like, ask me, how do I survive? So that's the question I started asking. How do I survive?
How?
Yeah. And it came down to something very simple. It came down to breathing, because if we're not breathing, we're going to be in our lower part of our brain where we make emotional decisions. If we take nice, big, deep breaths, you get into the prefrontal cortex. You actually think better, right? So breathe. Okay. And then, what is my next best step? And it doesn't have to be the right step, because the right step question will cause us to be stuck. Why keeps me stuck? And the right question, the right step keeps me stuck. So what's the next best thing I can do? And what I did was just simply out of trust and faith and obedience, I just took that first step, whatever it was, and then God met me there. And then he shined a light at my feet to show me what the next best step could be. And he met me there. And this went on and on and on.
Step after step.
Yes, step after step. And sometimes I went backwards and things like that. And I don't, I never want people to walk away thinking I'm some superhero type person, because my next best step early on could be like pulling the covers off my head, getting up, brushing my teeth, walking around for 30 seconds, and getting back in the bed. And that was success that day. And that's okay, because it was movement. And the next day, maybe I could do something around my house, or I could go, to the store, and eventually I could work my job, and on and on and on it goes. And so this was how the healing journey played out for me. And at some point in that journey, the question began to change. And the question went from how do I survive to how do I thrive? Because here's what I knew. I knew I wanted to live. I wanted to feel, I wanted to have joy. I wanted to be able to be happy. And I knew that I didn't want to be stuck. I have friends that have had losses of children 30 years ago and they're still stuck. And I'm like, I don't want to be like that,
It's
God.
true.
Please, please don't let me be like that. And so the question of how do I thrive created a sweet space for God to begin to work and to redeem the story for me. And so it gave me opportunities to work with women who had lost children and lead grief groups. And it led us on the wild ride and journey of adopting 9 children. And it led us into starting the ministry Anchor Point, where we get to minister to thousands of people each and every year when we help families. It led to writing the book, The Heart of Legacy, and all of these things. And I got to be the young grandma. I have 15 grandkids. And so I got that, in a different way. But the reality is that, the truth be told, I don't wish my story on anyone. But, all of these things have come because I have gone through that difficult situation, and God used it to form me into the person that He needed me to be able to do all these other things. And so the joy for me is that my boy's legacy lives on even today through me and the impact that I get to make. And I realize, now that, when I get to heaven, why won't matter. My boys will be there. Jesus is there.
Right.
And when we think about eternity, it's a really long-term view, right? We'll be together a really long time. And this season on this earth, while it feels like forever, is really going to be short in comparison. Yeah. And so that's my journey of working my way through a really big loss and figuring my way back and having joy and letting God redeem that story.
Well, everyone, we heard it here. We're going to take a break and we'll come back because you took us through the journey. And I understand that there were highs and there were lows. And when you were asking that why, that was something that you could hold on to. You nursed it. That was what you had. And for God to ask it you because He realized there needed to be a release. So we'll be right back as we go to our paid commercial break.
Remember when coffee was just coffee? A routine sip, part of the 2 billion cups consumed daily, enough to fill an Olympic swimming pool every 3 minutes. Same old flavor, same old routine. For centuries, 75% of coffee drinkers have settled for mediocrity, masking the taste with sugar, syrups, and overpriced add-ons. But what if coffee didn't just promise to be amazing? What if it actually was? Introducing Alive Coffee, the first coffee that tastes as good as it makes you feel. Meet the coffee that thinks beyond the cup. Bold, smooth, alive. Made from expertly roasted top-quality beans, Alive Coffee is smooth, rich, and shockingly delicious. Stop drinking May, start drinking Alive. The coffee that delivers just like the 90% who won't start their day without it. Alive Coffee. Wake up, take over. Feel alive.
All right, everyone. So we are back. We are back. When I go to that commercial about feeling alive and everything, it shows that you had that will to want to live and for more. Giving up your why was what God realized you needed to do in order for you to move forward into your next season, right? Sometimes, like you mentioned earlier, there are those who lost their child maybe 30 years ago and they're still stuck in that place, right? But God realized there was so much more to you, Debbie, and you had so much more to give. All right. So He asked you for the one thing that you wanted to hold on to, the one thing that you wanted to nurse, the one thing you were like, I just want to stay here. I lost. I want to stay in this because if I don't, then it might be that I'm forgetting them. It might be that, I'm just tuning them out. But no, God said, you know what? Let's turn this. Okay, let's turn this. Let me take this why and let me give you a reason. Let me take this pain and let me give you a purpose. All right.
Mhm.
And that is how the legacy continue. Because if you were just holding on to that why and being who you are today, it would have disabled you in such a way that getting out of bed would not be exciting. I remember, like you said, taking the covers on certain days was a lot, right?
Mhm.
Because that's how much it weighed down on you. It wasn't one, but four. You
Mhm.
understand, all at the same time, when you are, at least if I had one that I could hold on to, but in not having that, it is very difficult, okay, for women. Even men go through this too. A lot of people don't think that men do, but men, just because they didn't carry the child did not mean they too didn't suffer, because they have to go through the emotions with you, the highs and the lows with you. And maybe they don't talk about it like us women. We are about our feelings and our emotions. We will share it. We'll do everything, but men don't. It doesn't mean that they're not. But here it is now. God is asking you, I want that, because there's more to you. And
Mhm.
now you go into this journey, continuing the legacy, pouring it in other children. All right. Now you went into 9 children that you adopted. All right. Now
Mhm.
take us through, now that you was at a point where you had your own, you lost it. How was it like now to accept, let me just adopt? What was going through your mind? What was your emotions like as you decided on such a journey?
Oh, that's a great question. After we lost the boys, about probably within about a year, I decided that we were going to try maybe and get pregnant again. And we started to do that. And I just realized, because most of the infertility issues were my issues, that I just could not handle it. I could not be poked and prodded. And I just was like, I can't do this. And so we
Mm-hmm.
started, and then I was just like, okay, God, that's not going to work. And at that point, I was an engineer for Exxon, and God kind of pulled me out of that. And because one of the things that changed when we lost the boys was this perspective on eternity became very clear. And I wanted
Mm-hmm.
everything in my life to be about eternal things. And so when I went back to work at Exxon, great place, loved my job. It just wasn't quite as exciting to work on tanks and pumps and all this cool stuff to make sure you had
Right.
gasoline and all that stuff. And God just started pulling me toward ministry. He just did, over about a
Mm-hmm.
2-year period. So I actually ended up leaving that career and going into seminary to get a seminary degree, because I really felt like God was leading me to do something in ministry. I had no idea.
Wow. Let me say this now. You moved from being a woman of influence, a woman that was moving and shaking, making, like they call it today, you were making the coins, you had the
Yeah.
bag, all right? To now going into ministry. A lot of people might not understand that, because there's a lot of people who come away from, the corporate environment, come from having X amount every month, every year, so many zeros, and then to make a decision that I am going to go ministry, I am going to go kingdom. What
Mhm.
people don't understand is that's also a part of the healing journey for you
Yes.
as an individual. Okay. It's more than, oh, why did you leave such a high paying job? Like you said at Exxon, being the brain behind the movement and bringing
Mhm.
everything together, because now you realize, above all of that, even though you were the designer engineer in
Mhm.
this thing, God was the greatest engineer, and you decided to say yes to God, the engineer, chief
Yes.
engineer.
Yeah.
Wow,
So yeah,
that's
so we
awesome.
began we began to trust him with that. And
That's it.
it was really funny, because my journey to obedience was not quick. Okay, because God's like, I want you to go do
Talk
this, and
about
I'm
that.
like, heck no, dude, are you crazy? And so it took a little while to get to a yes. Okay, but I do know, and am confident of that, God doesn't let you go off the hook. And so
Right.
He eventually got me to yes. And so I've learned to try and be a yes girl much sooner. Okay, so when we went to seminary, it was actually funny, because my husband was in graduate school and
Hmm.
he was not near completion. And I walked away from my Exxon job. He walked away from finishing his doctoral work, and we swapped. And
Wow.
that is very unusual. And we just prayed for God to provide him a job because we didn't know what he was going to do.
Right.
And God did. He was faithful. My husband, works at NASA, gets to train, astronauts and cosmonauts, which is kind of cool. But
Cool.
he's done that for almost 30 years. And it's the perfect thing. And it was the thing that God provided so that I could walk away from engineering.
Right.
And that just took us on a wild ride of learning to follow God, even when we don't have all the answers.
Obedience.
And so,
Obedience.
yeah. And so when I finished seminary, I was working full-time, part-time pay on a church staff, which was fine. But I went to the pastor and I said, hey, do you ever think this will become full-time pay? And he was like, I don't know, da, 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 da. And I said, well, with your blessing, I want to explore what else might be out there. And maybe I'll be called to stay here, but maybe not. And I want your blessing. And so he gave me the blessing. So we began to pray. And here's the things we prayed for. We said, God, show me, Debbie, what job you want me to do. Show Scott what job you want him to do, and wherever it is in the country, and we'll go. And that was our three things that we started praying.
Wow.
And God revealed what he wanted me to do. And he revealed the area of the country, which was in South Carolina. And so we agreed to move without knowing what my husband was going to do. And he was training astronauts for a shuttle launch. And he stayed behind for, it was going to be about 6 months while I went ahead and went to South Carolina. And in that 6-month time, God made a way for that boy to be able to work out of our home in South Carolina and do very similar to what he was already doing.
Wow.
It was amazing. And so God, God answered that. So when we got to South Carolina, that was the first time we both, the dust kind of settled and we're both standing there and I'm looking at him and I'm going, okay, dude, I'm not getting any younger. And if we're going to try again, then maybe we need to try again. Or would we be open to considering adoption? And we had never really thought about it before, but we sat down and we started talking about it, and all those things that you think about, like, okay, could I love a child that's not my own, like not my own blood?
Yeah.
And, I sat down and I was thinking about that and I was like, you know what? I love my husband and he ain't my blood. And so God must be able to do something in that. So that's probably not going to be an issue,
I like your logic on that.
I'm like, okay, so I ruled that out. And then I was like, I know I want multiple kids because remember, I still want to be a young grandma.
Your young grandma. I was just going to say, young grandma.
Yeah. And so we were open to sibling groups. We didn't feel called to international adoption and we didn't feel called to infant adoption. And so we were open to a sibling group. And generally we wanted the youngest kid to be about 5, which if you learn the CPS system and all that stuff, older children over 2 and large sibling groups are very hard to place. And so we just started the process. We didn't have a clue what we were doing, but we just kind of started it. And it wasn't this desire to replace the children that we lost. This was just now, this plan B became our plan A. And God graciously gave us in our first adoption a sibling group of 5. Wow. And they were 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 when they came to our home. Yeah, so we moved a basketball team in. So it's kind of exciting. And I remember it totally, we've been married 11 years and we were kind of set in our ways. We had our plans, we did it, we did whatever. This disrupted everything.
Sure.
Everything. I remember the very first day, the youngest child, he comes in, they had been outside playing in the backyard. He comes in the house and he is looking up at me and he's like, Mom. And I'm looking down at him and I'm like, yeah. And he's like, Mom, what's for dinner? And I'm like, looking at him and I was like, do you ask this question every day? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, I'm seriously unprepared. And so at that time I had a master's in organizational management and it kind of kicked in and
listen, moms have all degrees. Okay. You want to get a resume?
Yeah.
You're a cheerleader, a coach,
Yeah.
psychology, all of it.
Yeah, so that kicked into high gear. I got systems everywhere, a laundry system, a food system, and everything. And we started making our way. And I will tell you that that was really all we really planned was those, like five. I had one at 4. 5 seems like enough. And the other, this is the really cool God piece of that. Okay, my boys were born on April 1st of 1995. My first 5 children came into my home on April 1st of 2002. That is 7 years to the day. And we say that God redeemed that day for us and gave us more than our 4, just like Job was blessed as he walked through it. So we thought, this is it. This is great. It's like overwhelming. It's wonderful, and off we go and everything. And it was about, and it's hard because all of my kids have trauma backgrounds. They all have experienced abuse and neglect and all kinds of things that children shouldn't have to experience. Yeah. And so what I learned was that Debbie had a lot of growing to do because Debbie had some of her own stuff that still needed to be healed. And God gives you children, and they're wonderful little things. They just poke right at those places and get you all lit up. And so I just became really good and very intentional about walking through my junk and figuring out how to get rid of my junk so that I could be fully present for these children and help them walk through their junk. And I just teach parents, I'm like, you cannot go where you can't take a child where you have not gone yourself. Right. And so, so this just became the mantra, and I have 5, so I got lots of chances to figure that stuff out. Right. And about 7 years later, I told my husband, I'd been at a conference and Francis Chan was talking, and he told a story about a couple that adopted children in a third world country. And he was a paraplegic, and they just kept adding these orphans into their home that were left on the streets. And it just really convicted me. And I knew enough to go, I know how big my house is. And if I rearrange the kids, I could get 14 kids in here based on CPS regulations.
Right.
And so as soon as Francis finished, he said this one thing at the very end. He said, none of us, all of us would want to be this man and this woman when they get in front of Jesus and he says, well done, good and faithful servant.
Yes.
Okay. And he said, none of us would want to be them now. Okay. And anyway, he prayed and it was over. I didn't even get out of my seat. I called my husband. I was in Georgia, and I said, dude, we're supposed to turn our application in to adopt again. And he was like, no way. He was like, stay gone. And I was like, you gotta pray about it. And he agreed to pray about it. And it was about 6 weeks. And he came and he said, okay, we can turn it in. And the kids were super, like, they just have such great hearts. They wanted to help other kids. And so we turned our stuff in, just trying to be obedient, not really wanting more kids, but just being obedient. And 6 months later, we have another sibling group in our home. And at that point, they were 11 and 14. And then mine were 15, 16, 17, 18. And the list goes on. And that at that point, we became the latest version of the Geraldo show is what it looked like, when they're all like, that's what our home is like. And it was hard because we're already a blended family. Now you're blending a blended family, and everybody's got trauma, and it's, chaotic, but it's a good mess, but it's hard. And we would at times lay in the bed at night, and I'm looking at my husband. I'm like, dude, if God is not real, we are idiots. I don't know what we're doing. And our next thing, our very big mature prayer was, God help.
Yes.
And that's it. And so off we go. And we certainly think 7 is it.
Right.
I mean, 7 is it. Because now it's like, and we get about 3 years down the road, and my oldest daughter had gotten pregnant and was in a very bad relationship, and
Oh, okay.
it looked like the grandbaby was going to end up in CPS custody.
Wow.
And I just felt really convicted that we needed to turn our application in order to be prepared if something happened with that grandbaby. And my husband was like, no, no, this is too risky. No. And I was like, I'm just telling you, you got to start praying about it. So this went on for about 6 months of
Okay.
praying about it, because I was like, I just can't let it go. I'm telling you, we're supposed to turn it in. And I said, I don't know if it's to take care of the grandbaby, if we're supposed to adopt more people, or if there's another reason God's doing it.
Right.
I just know we're supposed to turn the
Because you
application
had
in.
to turn it.
Yes. So after 6 months, he was like, okay. And I was like, all right. So, I mean, you can just imagine, I'm calling the adoption places and I'm talking to them, and, they're trying to convince me how good adoption is. I'm like, chick, this ain't my first rodeo.
Right.
You don't have to tell me all that. I said, skip all that. I said, I just need to know your process and I need to turn my paperwork in. And she's like, well, why do you want to adopt it? And I'm like, I don't want to adopt. I want to be obedient. That's all I'm trying to do is just turn it in. And she was like, you're perfect. You're great. I'm like, no, 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 no. So as it turns out, my grandchild did not end up in CPS custody, which was wonderful.
Good.
It was in that adoption cycle that we learned about trust-based relational intervention and the work of Dr. Karen Purvis out of TCU. And I remember being in that first training, and I looked at my husband when it was over, and I was like, dude, this is the missing piece. This is what we didn't have in understanding trauma and how to work with these kids. And I said, there better be a God, or we've screwed up our kids bad. And so fortunately there's a God, and he can work past my imperfections.
Right.
And so we got introduced to that, which revolutionized what we do at Anchor Point. Okay. So it was definitely useful there. And we were blessed with 2 more kids. So we ended up with our last 2. And then, just so you can have the whole story, is that right when we were almost 50, a lot of them were moving out of the house, and we were getting a lot of space in rooms, and everything. And I said, do you think we ought to adopt again? And my husband was like, his no technique had never worked before. So he swapped up his technique, and he said, I need you to pray about it. And I was like, okay, what do you want me to pray about? And he's like, you need to pray about whether we bring more children in our home, which would be good, or should we invest our time in more families that can bring children into their homes? And so I started praying about that. And over about a 3 or 4 week period, my youngest child had some massive disruptions in his life, and they always happened when I had a CEO meeting to go to. And I'm like, I had to put my meeting on hold, and I'm going to take care of my child, but it disrupted a lot of the stuff I was trying to do ministry wise. It's absolutely fine, and we worked through all those things. But when it happened 2 or 3 or 4 times, I realized maybe it's not time to bring more children in the home. So my husband was like, phew, so not that God would not still bring children into our home. We're totally open to that. But we spend more of our time now investing in others to bring kiddos in there. And that's been a wonderful, hard and good ride. And it has lots of stories. And when you have trauma backgrounds and we get into adulthood, the world, sometimes you can slip into bad situations, and the world can be a hard place for my children. And so they've done some things that I don't always agree with, but guess what? These are my kids, and they've been given to me. And, whether I have one living on the streets homeless, or I have one that's a drug dealer, or I have one that's a prostitute, I've had all these cases. And God has just given us a heartbeat to understand that as parents, our job is to plant positive seeds, leave them a bridge to Jesus, and love them no matter where they are, and be there when they hit bottom. And so there's been lots of good things and highs and all that, but there's been a lot of hards in that too. And it's still in the center of God's heartbeat, and it is worth it. And it's been a wonderful journey for us to do that with them.
Wow, wow. That is indeed a wonderful journey to see what you have emerged from, what was meant to deter you, what was meant to break you, um, that God put those pieces together so
Mhm.
that you can continue and open up your home. Now, you said seven because we're still missing two,
No,
right?
no, no. The third adoption got the last two. So
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. So I did get
Okay.
9. I got 9. Believe me, I know all 9 of them, and they're great.
All right. So we're going to go right here. So we're here into your book here, which is The Heart of Legacy. So this book takes us through what journey exactly?
So this is a book that about it. I actually wrote it the first pass about 7 years ago, but
Okay.
about it, and I did it out of obedience. And then I'm like, shut the lid on the computer. I'm like, okay, God, we're done with that.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
about a year and a half ago, God said, I want you to get the book out. We're finishing it. It's time. And I was like, oh, really? And it is my journey story of a lot of what we talked about today, but you get the whole deal there. And then it's about, I want people to be legacy makers. And this idea of being extremely intentional in everything, you have to live your legacy now to have one that lasts later. We're going to
mm-hmm,
have one, but do you want it to be, so like when I was sitting around with a friend, I was like, hey, do you want to start this anchor point thing that's going to outlive us?
mm-hmm.
And everything. And it was about how could I be intentional? And so it is that journey that God has had me on. In the very center, it focuses on 3 kind of core concepts: to be focused, faithful, and fearless. And it gives you
Mm-hmm.
all wonderful application things where you can learn to begin to apply these things in your life so that you and I can be more intentional together. And then the last part of the book has wonderful stories of life change for people that have gone through the Anchor Point ministry. But it is such a valuable thing when you and I are living intentionally, living out our legacies, the ripple effects that we can have for God now and into eternity are just amazing. So that is the heart behind that book.
Wow, wow. That
Mhm.
is indeed amazing, amazing, amazing. It's truly, I believe everyone should be able to connect with this book. And when I listen to your story here, I am seeing obedience. That keeps being the one,
Mm.
even though, because I've been talking in this past season about delayed obedience, because delayed obedience is disobedience, correct? But what
Yes.
happens now is the fact that even though there was a delay in your obedience, you eventually did, say yes. But what you learned in this journey was when God said it, to just go ahead and do it, even if
Yes.
you didn't understand, to step out on faith. So that is
Mhm.
why He took your why, because if you were still holding on to your why, you would
Yeah.
never be obedient.
Yeah, and
All
guess
right.
what? This is the other piece too that I've learned is that, sometimes it's really hard for me to say yes because I go, oh my gosh, how am I going to do that? Right. Or I don't,
Mm-hmm.
no, you can't, no, or whatever. And the really easy yes for me to give, if I believe my daddy God loves me and he's in charge, is when he
Right.
asks me to do something, I like to add yes. In him, I can do it. In you, I can do it. Yes,
Yes.
in you. And then I know it's not dependent on me. I am just a vessel
Right.
at that point because he wants to do something in and through me. And when I go, yes, in you, I can, then you'll help me figure it out. And then I go, okay, Daddy God, I said yes, but I don't have a clue. So you're going to need to let me know what's next because I have no idea how to do this. And then
Yeah.
it's all on him. And he wants it to be all on him anyway. He just wants
Right.
us to be willing. And so I just like to tell people is this whole journey in my life has just taught me how to build a faith muscle. and to strengthen it. And you work it out and you say yes and you keep going. You say yes again and you say yes. And then your little faith muscle becomes a big faith muscle. And so that's the journey we're on together.
Indeed, indeed. So we're going to close out on this segment. Number one, where can they find your book?
Mhm. Yes. So they can go to my website. It's DebbieSimmons.com. And there's information there on speaking and on the book and on coaching and all the good stuff that's there. And what do they tell me? All those cool social media handles are there that you need to like, connect, follow, whatever they are. So I would love for people to do that because I love being on the journey together, because I think that makes it way more special when we can do it all together.
Right, indeed. And also your organization. We will have all these links in the bio as we give a description for this podcast. And if you would like to reach out, if you would like to donate as well to, what is the name of the foundation again, Debbie?
Yes. So the ministry is anchorpoint.us.
Anchor Point.
Yes. And I would tell you one real cool thing that they can do. I know a lot of your listeners are prayers, and if you go to the anchorpoint.us, they can click on the 911 prayer. And what they will get is they will get a text every time we need to be pleading on the behalf of one of our clients. So whether they're trying to choose life or whether they're struggling with a kid, you get to be on the front lines of ministry. So I would encourage them to join us on that text string because it is invaluable for making a difference.
So again, that is Anchor Point. So if I could add this in here.
.us.
So someone type it in while you're watching. Help my fingers because you're watching. Work to anchorpoint.us. And also for the emergency, the 911 prayer. All right. There you can connect as well. All right. So put it in the chat, anchorpoint.us. Go ahead. Thank you so much. And this is another way to connect with Debbie. Now, Debbie, is Anchor Point just local or is it international?
It's local, but we also have a lot of families that come from across the country to do a lot of therapeutic camps. And so it is great. And anybody can be anywhere and pray. So I'm like, you could be on the team. So we'd love to have you.
Okay, great, great. So everyone, you heard it here on Emerging in Power while we have Debbie on. What I just love and it's amazing about the story is how, God, the great designer of all things, engineer of all things, calling on an engineer who realized, you know what, I got to be obedient to God here, and how God flipped the script. But just this story is reminding me about when Abram left. He was with his family and everything, and God asked him to leave. He didn't ask any question. He just got up and go. And his obedience brought him into his life. Okay. It brought him into, he did go through difficulties. It wasn't all a bed of roses. They were childless for so many years. Okay, even today, we still see this war going on among brothers, all right? Because when God asks us to do something, we have to understand the key here is the obedience in that, all right? And this is what he said when he was talking to King Saul, what is better to obey than to sacrifice. So eventually, like Debbie said in the beginning, like, God, I don't know about this right now, right? I don't know about this right now. I'll pull you in. I don't know about this right now, but eventually she realized she had to submit her will to God. And once she did this, the next time God asked her, she didn't stall. She just moved and had that push to just do it. I don't know what's going to come out of this, but I know what I need to do. There are many of you that might be listening under this live where you've been into spaces or heard things that you needed to connect with, but you ignored it and you walked away from it. And you knew that you had a pull on you at that time to move, right? To react, but instead didn't. So I hope this brings you repentance, right? Repentance, and ask God, sorry, God, I've been delayed obedience. I know I will eventually do it. That's like telling a child to wash the dishes and you come back home from work and the dishes are not washed. It's still disobedience. If they decide to start washing the dishes as soon as you get in the driveway, they didn't do it when you asked them to do it. They eventually came about to do it. So delayed obedience is disobedience. All right. So Debbie, as we're closing out on today, right? Before I ask you, because I feel to have you lead us in prayer as we
Mhm.
close out, what does God have on your heart to say to the audience? Whoever that is that God put in your spirit right now, speak life into them at this time.
Sure, I'd love to do that. I would tell your audience if it's someone who is struggling and feels like their world is just over. And I would just say it's like the fog has just landed. And the way through the fog is the path that they have to go. And they can trust their daddy God. He is not surprised by anywhere we sit or anything that we face, and that He is still near. Sometimes we don't feel that way, but when He looks at you, He sees value and He loves you and He wants nothing but the best for you. And so lean in and trust Him with that pain, with that why question, with the unknown. And He is faithful. He shows it over and over in the Bible, but He also has shown it over and over in my story. And I can tell you, every time He's always there. He always helps us figure our way, and it is worth it. And it has been rich, the journey. So hang in there, hold tight, lean in, trust your daddy God. He's got you.
Amen. Trust. That's the key word, to trust. You
Mhm.
cannot let go unless you trust. You cannot heal until you're ready to talk about it, to step in and say, you know what, I need to face the ugly truth. That's the only way that you can release this. Unforgiveness is another thing that you hold on to, because remember, Debbie was holding on to her why, and God didn't want her to hold on to that because it was blocking her from her next, from her elevation, from what God had destined for her life. Okay. She was able to bring in these children into her home, all right, to do the best that she can, to train them up in a godly way. But what happens is when children come from traumatic experiences, again, I pray that they even now continue on this path of healing, because the
Mhm.
healing journey is not something that's overnight. All right, it's not forced upon, but a decision must be made. And I am praying for those children that have come through your doors, and also the lives of children that they will touch,
Mhm.
okay, through such a powerful testimony that you were a vessel, ready to be utilized, and say, God, use me. During the time that you are talking, I'm reminded of the song that says, all to Jesus I surrender, all to Him I truly give.
Yep.
That was the song. As you were talking, this is what I was hearing in my spirit. All to Jesus I surrender. And yes, He will say, good and faithful servant, for taking in children and continuing to help others to do the same. That is commendable. And may God continue to strengthen you. May God continue to bless you and your husband in the ministry that He has entrusted you with. So, right now, Debbie, let us go ahead and lead us out in prayer at this time.
All right, I'll be glad to. Uh, Daddy God,
Yes.
we just come before you and we thank you for today and for life and for breath, for we know it all comes from you, and that you look at us and you smile and you choose to use each one of us. You could have chosen so many different ways to save the world, and you choose to allow us to be part of your journey. And we want to be those people, God, but sometimes it's hard. And so I pray that you would encourage each one of us to be brave and to be courageous. And you know what? It really isn't risky to lean into the God of the universe, but God, it seems like it. And so I just pray, make us brave, make us courageous, teach us how to let go of our whys and to trust you, that you are writing a beautiful and wonderful story. And in you, we can do each and everything, whether it's a tragedy we've gone through or whether it's a new adventure. God, you want us to link arms with you and you want to guide us through the way, and that we can just go, okay, Daddy God, we don't get it. Show us the way. And Father, most of all, what we want to do is to bring glory to you. And may our lives reveal to people who may never pick up a Bible who you are, and may it draw them to you so that they will ask us what makes us different. And we'll be able to say, let me tell you about my Jesus. We love you guys. Amen.
Amen. Amen. A beautiful prayer. Now, you might look at the date on this timestamp for those who are watching in a month from now, a year from now, however long that this podcast is out there. The time that you are watching and listening, it is the time that God is speaking to you at that moment. So, yes, He's speaking to you right now. Let go of that why that has become your crutch and lean on to God and not your own understanding. Acknowledge Him. Amen. So thank you so much, Debbie, for being here on Emerge and Empower. Everyone, I want to thank you. Like I said, we are here just bringing you story after story, inspiration, empowerment, and it's all to help you get on the front row seat of your life. That's why now we put in the background this big comfy couch for you to know it's okay. Relax and let go and let God. And I want to thank you once again for tuning in with us on Emerge and Empower. Let's take this global. We're spreading the good news of Jesus Christ, one story at a time. And stay tuned. Until next week, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye, Debbie. Thank you for coming on today.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.